Hey everyone, my name's Will Freeman. I'm a freelance video games journalist. I was involved earlier in the week in a screening of a documentary at the London Games Festival called Pretending I'm a Superman, an absolutely fantastic documentary about the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, their relationship with skateboarding, perhaps more than that, kind of their impact and their legacy in terms of how they kind of affected popular culture generally and still do. Straight after the screening, I was lucky enough to be the host of a Q&A with the film's director, Ludwig Göhr, and the film's producer, Ralph Di Matteo. Ralph, also producer on many of the defining Tony Hawk games. Really fascinating conversation, whether you're interested in those specific games generally, skateboarding, or just popular culture. It should be really interesting to you. I really hope you enjoy it. So first, just to welcome the director of Pretending I'm a Superman, Ludwig Göhr, and the producer, Ralph Di Matteo, who's also here. Hey, Ludwig. Hey, Ralph. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No worries. Let's dive in straight into the questions, right? Oh, actually, just to say, if you're watching now, I really hope you are, then put any questions you have for Ludwig and Ralph into the chat. I will see them come up on my screen, and we'll try and tuck into as many as we can if I stop the talking and get on with asking my questions. So guys, I'll put this one to yourself first of all, Ludwig, but really, to hear about, I've already said your title, but kind of your role on the film, and while you're introducing yourself, just when skateboarding itself sort of became part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, so, like you said, my name's Ludwig. I'm the director of this film, and I started playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater when I was like 4 years old, and, video games have been a huge part of my life, and those never left my life wherever I went. I played them all the way through kindergarten to high school, and, skateboarding has been a big part of my life all the way through that as well. I never became particularly good like you said, Will, as well, but it was a huge part of my life. I watched skate videos all the time. And also, I started making YouTube videos about Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, I think when I was around maybe 13, 14 years old. And Ralph saw those videos, and that's the reason we're here, actually. So I think Ralph can continue on to that after he tells his amazing story of working at Neversoft.
Ralph, same to you. Like, you've got, I don't know if your professional relationship with skateboarding was the beginning of you and skateboarding, or did it come into your life earlier than that?
Yeah, I mean, I used to skate when I was a kid. I'm a bit older than Ludwig, and I was, the early and mid 70s, and it was mostly just pushing a skateboard around, no real tricks or anything. But it was always fun. I was into it. I watched all the videos. I definitely watched the Bones Brigade videos growing up, and moving from, I was born in New York, moving there to California. It became a bigger influence. Again, I never was any good at it aside from, just being able to push to a friend's house and jump off of some curbs and so forth. But that's kind of my background with skateboarding as a whole.
Right, fantastic. So what we've established is we've got three people that aren't particularly great at skateboarding but know a lot about it. Fantastic. Yes. Actually, I'm not even sure if I bring the second, but right. So I guess again, Ludwig, this grew from this amazing thing of, like, first of all, you were making videos about, was it about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater specifically on YouTube? Like, just to hear, it'd be great to hear that story of your early time combining a love of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and moving image, I guess.
Yeah, but essentially how it kind of started was that, it was during the time when I guess Call of Duty was kind of at its peak, like around Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops, and I just never really got into those games, and all my friends were playing them. So what I did instead was kind of look up, because online game was so into at that time, I was kind of looking up communities that still played the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, and it turned out there was this real, like, small community of people still playing Tony Hawk's Underground online on a PlayStation 2. This was maybe like in 2010. So I joined that community, and I noticed that nobody was like making any YouTube videos like the ones that they put up on Machinima, where they had like a guy commentating and sort of getting, I don't know, no scope, 360, all that stuff. So I actually kind of decided to do that myself, but with Tony Hawk. And that kind of grew because right around the time as well, that's when they announced the first remake of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD. And from there on, it kind of continued. And eventually, I think I saw a few of those, like those kind of history of this video game franchise videos started popping up on YouTube. Obviously, like back then in 2012, they weren't that great. Like now they're, like I can't remember the name of that guy, Danny I can't remember what his name is, but now they're like almost like professional documentaries. But back then they weren't. So I actually did one of those myself on the Tony Hawk games, and that's kind of the video that got seen. That's probably the only video I ever did that really got seen by a lot of, maybe I think it has 500,000 hits. So
Right, okay.
And that was real cool, especially back then. Now there's like 3 other History of Tony Hawk videos that are way better than this one. But like back then I was like,
that's debatable.
Yeah.
Well, Ralph, like you've chimed in there to like defend it. Like you obviously saw something in, like how to put it? Like there's a craft to any video making, right? But the pretending I'm Superman is a different entity from what a YouTube video is. But how did you come across this YouTube video by, at that time, some guy named Ludwig, and what did you see in it?
Yeah, I don't remember if anybody sent it to me. I think it was just one of those kind of like, drifting down the rabbit hole on YouTube and surfing along and seeing this history of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And I think the first thing that hit me was the length of it. Like I can't, if I recall correctly, it was at least an hour or so. And I was like enthralled that somebody took the time to put that much into it. And the amount of detail he had behind this, the amount of information, that things that I just completely forgotten about, or things I didn't even know that were in the game.
Right.
Little Easter eggs that designers hide from everybody, those kind of things. So, and it just kind of struck me how well it was put together. But initially, I really didn't. I sent it. Actually, I sent it to a few guys at Neversoft. That I worked on the first 8 games. I was a producer at Neversoft, so I sent it to a few guys. They dug it. I sent it to Tony. He had actually already seen it, I think. I was debating whether or not to reach out. And my wife kind of was the one that said, hey, you know what? You should really at least message him and tell him that you enjoyed this. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And I did the kind of, I don't know, whatever. And then finally I did. I messaged him and just told him how stoked I was that, that to watch it and how much detail he put into it. And he's like an encyclopedia of Tony Hawk information. And that's kind of where our relationship started,
right.
After that message. And, it's kind of funny. YouTube has taken away the ability to really message creators. So that might have never happened,
Right.
Yeah.
And that must have been incredible for you, Ludwig, right? That's almost the like dream route into filmmaking that happens to somebody else, right? That you made something on YouTube and it got seen by somebody so close to the project. Like,
totally. I can't say that was a goal. Obviously we just wanted to make sense, because I made it with my twin brother, who was really like, at that time I really wasn't into video editing, but he was really was really passionate about it, that we would actually make it watchable, and not just like stills from the Tony Hawk games and like insert the song from the Tony Hawk game and have no information. So that was really cool. I actually remember, I think it was Super Bowl 2014. I was up all night watching, and then I got that message, and it was pretty crazy when I actually read it to my brother. We were like, "Whoa, that's so awesome!" And we immediately, looked up the old game manual from Tony Hawk 1 to Project 8, and we just, he's right there. So that's him,
Yeah, and I don't think he believed it was me, which is kind of funny. It was like, yeah.
I did ask for verification, but it's kind of like, I guess
he wanted
to have that.
He wanted to see my driver's license.
Yeah. Now I think about it, I haven't verified either of you, but we'll proceed on a trust basis. And actually, Ralph, but you've mentioned kind of almost in passing, then you worked on from the first game to Tony Hawk's 8, right? Like,
Project 8.
It'd be great to hear just, I guess people in games know what a producer is, but just a little about like how involved, how close to the core of the Tony Hawk games you were through that time.
Yeah, at the beginning, the first game, there was 13 of us, 14 of us that were on the team. And, production is just a matter of organizing, making sure the team has what they need to get going, scheduling, making sure people are on top of scheduling, budgeting, I did a little bit of everything within the video game as the game got bigger. So the first one, there was 13. The last game I worked on, Project 8, there was probably 150 people on the team. So as the consoles got more and the games got more in depth, you needed more people, and so you got more producers, and you kind of just then you start handling specific areas of the game, like animation or character art or soundtrack, which are some of the ones that I was sort of in charge of from the Neversoft side. And it's not an individual thing; it was an entire group of people that made the games what they were. A lot of really, really super talented people, from designers to artists to programmers, that made the games the way they were, and we delivered on time in a time where you couldn't update games over the internet. If you burnt it on a disc, and if something was messed up, you had to pull all those discs off and redo everything. It cost a lot of money. There was no beta period and patches and all that good stuff. So you have a really good dedicated team of people that I got to work with, and I'm still really good friends with, and I've even done future projects with. One of which, who was in the film, Chris Roush, I did an app with, and he was sort of a little bit of my inspiration. I had talked to him when we were doing that app about maybe doing a documentary about our experience in making the video game, and he sort of pushed me a little bit and said that if anybody should do it, it should be you. You were there from the beginning. You're a producer, so that kind of pushed me a little bit. But really, until we met up and Ludwig and I met up, I didn't have, I didn't have a director. I'm a producer. I'm not I don't have that director mind that he does. So that video kind of got us together, and that's how this all became to be.
And just as a brief aside, I guess, if what Tony Hawk Pro Skating, one of the things it did is so authentically captured what skateboarding is and delivered it in a way that was accessible to the non-skater. And often people point to that time or talk about that time of like the early Neversoft staff actually learning to skate a little as part of the development process. Of course, you already had skated a little in your youth, as I guess most people had, right? Like you had to back then. But were you part of that? Like, was getting on a skateboard part of your work on that first game?
Yeah. I mean, Joel had an open policy to any new person that came into the office that your first full complete setup was on Neversoft. So any new person that wanted to start skating, and it was really highly encouraged because he would also rent out some of the local skate parks and we'd go skating. I mean, I gave it a go, and I could pump some transition, and I started doing kick turns and stuff. The original Neversoft ramp that you see in a lot of videos was at Joel's house. Then it migrated over to my house it was at my house for probably 2 or 3 years, and I tried my best. But it's trying tricks and doing skate, doing that stuff in your early 30s, mid 30s is not the best idea in the world. So after one hang up on a rock and roll, that was it for me.
Right. Yeah. Well, the conversations a few times come back to the point that skating's really damn hard, but this is a convenient fluky segue to the next question of like, it's this incredibly tough sport, and yet the game connected with so many people. So Ludwig, like, when did you see, I guess, that core narrative, not that, correct me if I'm wrong, not wanting to speak for the narrative of your film, but that core narrative of like skateboarding's relationship with popular culture and then Tony Hawk Pro Skater's influence on popular culture. When did you start to kind of think about or identify that story as worth telling?
I guess that's a really good question, actually. But I mean, as the years of progress since that franchise was like hugely relevant, like as in a new franchise, obviously now it's relevant, but in a whole nother way, like for nostalgia purposes. I mean, I kind of felt like those games were a little bit like, I guess, Guitar Hero was in the sense that, they were so huge, like when they were big, that like when it eventually kind of faded away, people had sort of forgotten about it and turned into EA Skate and stuff like that. But then after a while, you started seeing a lot of early internet memes coming up. I think one of the first was like, there was a picture of Warehouse that came up on my Facebook feed like 2013. It was like, if you don't know this place, you never had a childhood. And from there on, I kind of grew. Like then skaters like Aaron Joss Moki, who's in the film, would be talking about in interviews like, I used to play Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and that's where I got inspired to do all this stuff. And, now it's bigger than ever. Like now I feel like everything is sort of connected to that. I mean, even like I rewatched Judd Apatow's film 40-Year-Old Virgin this Christmas, and at the start of the film, I think Steve Carell actually plays Tony Hawk's Underground 2, and that's probably the that most people miss. But now it's like people go on the internet like, did you know Steve Carell played Tony Hawk like in 40-Year-Old Virgin? And I don't know if that really answers your question, but I feel like in that sense, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater franchise was sort of the first cultural step for skateboarding to kind of stay within mainstream culture, and unlike in the early or in the late 70s, late 80s, where it was just huge and then just faded away, and like the skaters couldn't even make any money doing their sport now. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. I kind of went away a little.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's great. That section of the documentary, actually, when suddenly the footage was like 4:3 fisheye footage and everyone had very baggy jeans, it felt like every image I saw at that time in my life. I've still got the skateboarding VHSs somewhere. That was amazing to see that. Actually, I wanted to, ladies and gentlemen, I may have prepared a script of questions I've already largely deviated from, but I wanted to talk, like, Ralph, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the beginning, before the first game had released, there wasn't this surge of expectation and so on. Like, I just, or at least that felt the case in the UK. In fact, I still have got the copy here. When it was called Very Beat Up. I loved it. I never want that to be mint. And I went into a Virgin Megastore, which aren't around anymore. Something to do with Final Fantasy VIII. And I remember seeing, I guess I remember it so well because it did have a lot stayed with me. The game stayed with me. This very tall guy was putting on games to be sold that had just come out that day, and the one said Tony Hawk on the box, and I, a skater who was obsessed with video games, had no clue and just happened to be there on the right day. And is that a Tony Hawk game? And so just I've waffled too much, but I wonder how soon after, either before or after the game's first release, yourself, Ralph, and the team started to feel that it was having this influence beyond people enjoying a game.
There were a couple. There were a couple points throughout the entire development. The bar was set really low. There wasn't any really big expectation on this game. I was a brand new. I'd come from a completely different career. I knew the owner Joel. He gave me opportunity to be a producer at Neversoft, and part of the thing that shows you how small it was, he put me on what was this small video game, because Neversoft had just picked up 2 licenses, the Tony Hawk, it wasn't even the Tony Hawk game, it was just a skateboarding game at that time, and Spider-Man, which is a big Marvel license. So since I had no experience, I was put on the small skateboarding game. And then Tony signed on probably, I think, a month or 2 before I started, or maybe, about that. So what kind of set us off later in the process is when we started bringing in focus testers, and we would want criticisms from focus testers, and we weren't getting a lot of criticisms. We were just getting a lot of really over the top, glaringly great feedback from these kids that we had in, and a lot of skaters and a lot of just gamer kids. So that kind of set us like, hey, I think we're doing the right thing. But I think the bigger thing is when the demo came out, and it just sort of blew up. There was Final Fantasy was on that demo, and just like Chris Rauch said in the film, a lot of people were talking about the Tony Hawk game, and that kind of opened our eyes a bit that, whoa, this is sort of, maybe we have something here. But still, there was nobody on the team that was like, oh yeah, we're basking in glory or anything like that. We were struggling to get something finished and get all the bugs out and get something shipped. And and then Tony did the 900 that kind of aligned up really well with our release, and we were able to get that in. So, we kind of had a little bit of a thought, but until the sales came out, then it was just like, whoa, this is kind of taking on a life of its own, and people are really loving this video game. And then when the second one came out and it was number 1 and the first one was number 2, and we had locked the first, top 2 spots, it was just like, okay, we've got lightning in a bottle. Let's see how long we can hang on to it.
Yeah. And Ludwig, to pivot back to kind of, I guess, the filmmaking process, we've already talked, you were making a kind of YouTube scale video, for want of a better term, and then suddenly you're involved in this production, I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but a much more significant production. Like, how did you personally, as a filmmaker, find that shift from creating something for YouTube to yeah, being in as deep as you were.
Well, I mean, I wasn't entirely like I at that time too. Like during high school, I was also kind of getting into filmmaking, and I made a couple short films. I think one of them got into a few festivals, and I had
Oh,
like
okay.
some really, really small music, like real small. But this was obviously a huge step because this was the first thing I ever did with like legit names behind it. And it was really cool. But in a way, I guess it was. In a way, I guess it was good because I met Tony before that, and I talked to him, and it kind of felt just down to earth between us. We kind of got along really well. And Rodney Mullen was the second guy we interviewed for the documentary, and he too was so down to earth and just made me so chill that I really wasn't stressed out at all. And I think that's also because I wasn't really thinking about the experience as much because it just kind of felt like I have been waiting to do this all my life in a way. Because before Ralph and I met, I do remember posting a video where I was like asking people like, hey, do you think I should do a Kickstarter documentary about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater? And a lot of people were like saying, yeah, you should do it. And then, I obviously never figured out that this would happen. So
Yeah.
in a sense, I guess I was always kind of meant to do this. And because I didn't really think about it too much. So, it's been an amazing experience. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it every day. But
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I was never really stressed out or anything like that about it just felt really good, and I felt like I really connected with skaters. And obviously having Ralph in the project made it happen because I think if Ralph wasn't involved and it was just me and it was someone had like just told him, yeah, this kid is going to interview you, then it would be totally different. But because Ralph just really trusted me with this process, it was such an amazing experience because of that.
Yeah. And he was a total pro, and it was kind of funny because some of our bigger interviews were at the beginning, were our first ones where, he was interviewing Tony and Rodney, and I knew how much of an icon Tony is to him, and
yeah.
And I'd seen his work, I'd seen those shorts, and I was very confident in his skills. But I think when he interviewed Tony, he was 18, 17, 18, something like that.
19, but yeah, close.
Okay, 19.
Yeah.
That first time, okay, so 19. And I was like, okay, we're going to see how this rolls. We're going to see how it goes. And it was like no time. I was like, okay, I don't even have to be here for these things because he is just kind of just so pro. He didn't have any of that kind of fanboy stuff. He was really good at directing and getting information that he needed, and it was like watching a seasoned director, do his work. So that was really made things a lot easier for me as a producer, especially since I've been working with all these guys. I worked with all the skaters, over the 8 years that I've been working at Neversoft. So I had personal relationships with all these guys, which did make things a bit easier to get them on camera. Not so much the musicians. That was a little bit more of a process because I didn't have any relationships with them. But yeah, he was a pro the whole way.
And I guess I'll take that to the next question because you spoke, Ludwig, about kind of how easy they were to get on with, and you get that feeling of a kind of enthusiastic community. Yeah, a couple of times I've been in much briefer ways been lucky enough to interview Tony Hawk around game stuff, and it to me, someone who skateboards, and then just just an ordinary enthusiastic person who loves to talk about skateboarding, right? But with at the same, so I can see that thing, or you can feel that thing in the documentary. Like it just feels like a really fascinating, wonderful group of people to spend time with. And I guess you've got a few characters in there. And I just wondered, like, if you had any kind of most memorable and enjoyable moments from speaking, that range of people, Ludwig or Ralph, kind of, favorite moments from meeting humans like that.
No, for me, it's obviously Rodney Mullen because I kind of feel like he's a very, I read his book. Obviously, I read Tony's book as well. And Tony Hawk, he's a wonderful guy too. But Rodney Mullen, there's some magic with him that you can't really describe unless you meet him. And I'm sure Ralph knows exactly what I mean in the sense that, like, you can talk about pretty much anything. And he's really into the books I kind of like too as well. So that helps. So, like, I think the first time we met, we didn't even talk that much about skateboarding up until the interview. And the second time as well. So I feel in that sense, he's such an amazing character. And I think everybody who watched the documentary too just feels like they could watch pretty much just an hour like full of interviews with Rodney and they'd enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so interesting whatever he talks about, So that's definitely the biggest moment. And we interviewed him twice as well. I mean, only one of the interviews made it into the film because they're kind of similar. We mainly reshot it due to technical difficulties, not because of Rodney. Obviously, we would have kept anything with him.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely watch a 24/7 live stream of Rodney Mullen talking.
Yeah.
He's just such a captivating, distinct guy. I also wanted to ask, in terms of the making of the film, I guess with respect to some genuinely great documentaries I've enjoyed, like the very important Bones Brigade story and the story of kind of those big names' journey through skateboarding is relatively well told, and you told some of it, but there was something distinct about that. I'm not a filmmaker, but I'll say as a layperson, the first act, but the first section of the film, that telling of skateboarding's kind of relationship with the mainstream and how it came and went, like that felt really distinct. Why did you decide to go about that approach rather than maybe a more chronological history of what skateboarding is and the big names?
I think it's because, I mean, really, like when we started shooting the film, we really didn't have an idea like kind of how to tell the story. But I guess I had some sort of idea that you can't really tell the story of like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater without telling people about the story of the history of skateboarding. But a lot of people are very familiar with the whole Stacy Peralta, Dr. and the Boys beginnings, because obviously there's been both the documentary by Stacy Peralta and the feature film by Paramount. That's actually a studio film. That's pretty nuts that actually made a studio film skateboarding. But I really think in the 80s that's kind of where it started to get mainstream, in the sense that the skaters were in movies and it was in so many commercials. And I didn't feel like there were a whole lot of movies talking about that. I mean, they definitely glimpsed on the subject with films like the Christian Osoy documentary and the one about Gator. But I just feel like we kind of need to tell that in a kind of straightforward manner, because a lot of the films tell the story of how vert skating like just decreased in popularity like crazy during the late 80s, but not of like how it kind of came back with the X Games and all that stuff. And I just really wanted to get that into the film because X Games, I think, is one of the big reasons why skateboarding became so popular in the late 90s. And then Tony Hawk's Pro Skater just kind of boosted it to its heights, like maybe, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but maybe if there was no Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, skateboarding would have just faded off again in the late 90s. But instead, it stayed forever. So.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to pivot because they've asked it a bit better than I'd put it. I'll come back to as many of the audience questions, but an audience member has asked a kind of better version of what I was going to ask. Ariadne, hope I've pronounced your name right there. Wanted to ask about what the challenges are. They've said what were the challenges of producing a niche genre of game? Oh, actually, sorry, I'm going to take Ariadne's question and slightly tweak it, because she's asked about creating taking a niche genre of game and making it for a kind of mass open market. But Ludwig, you've made a film about a fairly niche interest, right? But it felt like a documentary that could be enjoyed by people even if they didn't have interest in skateboarding, etc. So I'm going to start with Ralph. Let's go for that, as that was the audience member's question. Like, how you guys approach making an authentic skating game for a broad audience?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of the direction was on Ludwig's. We had discussed a lot of things back and forth. My initial thought, again, being the producer, not the director, was it's just going to be, video game. Ludwig was really the one that had the whole story in mind to bring it kind of full circle. It was a niche, video game, but when you think about the impact it had globally, I mean, it was a #1 video game around the world. It had so much impact with the soundtrack to a wider audience, and the art and art style within the video game also got things pushing and popularizing different kind of street art stuff. So I think it had its impacts in a lot of different areas, even though skateboarding it might be considered a smaller, sport or smaller activity. So I just thought that not only the video game audience and the story behind the impact the video game had on this skateboarding and this industry and what it did to it. I thought that whole thing was a really good story to tell. I just, I didn't have the director chops to kind of put it all and seam it all together
Yeah.
the way Ludwig had.
Yeah.
And we argued, we obviously typical producer director, we argued over that for a bit. And thankfully I took, we went with his direction. and now we know why he's the director and I was the producer.
Right. Yeah, Ludwig, it'd be fun. Just to sort of, I guess, confirm, like, I guess maybe when I was saying a niche game, I guess before it came out, a skateboarding game had the potential to be a niche game, but obviously it grew beyond far beyond what one might guess a skateboarding game would be. But Ludwig, how did you approach making this a documentary that would be appealing or accessible to everyone, or did you approach it in that way?
Yeah, no, I just wanted. I want to tell this amazing story because it's an amazing story in the sense that this low budget video game essentially pushed skateboarding into the mainstream where it has stayed since. And I think a lot of people don't really understand the impact that video games can have. Now, I don't think there's a single video game that has had the same impact on another non-video game thing the way that Tony Hawk's Skater had. Like, obviously, maybe a lot of people get inspired to play basketball by playing NBA, but those sports are already huge. I mean, skateboarding that was something else entirely. Like, in a way, it wasn't necessarily the skateboarding factor that made that video game a hit in the first. I mean, obviously that kind of came with it, but it was a great game by Neversoft. And I think that's just an amazing story. And I really wanted people to understand that. And that's why I think it was also really important to show, like in the 80s and 70s, when obviously they kind of tried to get skateboarding into the mainstream, but they really didn't do it the way Neversoft did, which was making an authentic game with a badass soundtrack so that anyone who played it would just really get sucked into it. And, video games have that kind of impact that, you do something. I mean, you do something with your hands, eventually you do want to do it in real life. So people went out skateboarding, and I think, I don't know, maybe this is really, really like dumb thing to say, but I think like a lot of people, maybe like half the people skateboarding these days grew up playing those video games and were inspired to skate because of them. So I mean, that might be extremely exaggerated, but I'm still going to go ahead and say it anyway. So.
No, I think so. And just as I am now 40 and most of my skating is to the shop and back, but just watching pretending I'm a Superman gave me the like, oh, I want to get out there and skate. So like it was there, like it really, as someone who doesn't do it as much as they want to, I don't know whether by proxy, but that enthusiasm or that giving me the appetite to get back on a board was there in your film, certainly. I wanted to, you've got such rich history of, I guess, narrative and history and characters, and how quickly or how challenging was it to kind of zero in on the focus of the film? Did you have that set in mind before you both set out making it, or was that kind of a journey through the production?
No, I think if you look at our first draft or his first draft of the script, it's completely different than the final, which I think is commonplace. I think that's what happens. As you start getting into things, and Ludwig will speak to this, but I think a lot of the people that he interviewed kind of also steered the direction from the stories that they told.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, like Ralph said, when we started, we had no idea what we were going to do this, and we just thought it was essentially going to be like, I don't know, like kind of like a YouTube documentary, but because that's the thing about those. I mean, that's obviously the history of Tony Hawkins has been documented, in a YouTube format, but they're mainly directed towards, the gaming crowd. And I feel like we kind of wanted to step away from that. It just wasn't like, obviously there's a lot of details with the Tony Hawkins that are important, but like, I don't know. We wanted to make a film that showed the impact that the games had. That's what we realized. We wanted to show that amazing impact and how it changed the world, and not, like how the reverb changed the combos. That's fun too. But I just don't think that really belongs in a film that's about something else. That's really about this amazing phenomenon that happened. And I don't know. Who knows if it will happen again? I mean, I haven't seen it happen with anything else. I mean, I can truthfully say that. I mean, it's not like I usually say this, but it's not like Street Fighter made people want to become street fighters. And, that would be awesome. But
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's really like a really interesting point. I better somehow we've got 12 minutes. I've got heaps of questions, but I'm going to turn over to a couple of the audience ones. So from OLF Skateboards in Germany, a question for you, Ludwig, which is what's your advice for young and upcoming directors kind of realizing their first feature-length film? I'll leave it at that because I've touched on some of the other stuff. But obviously, YouTube is part of that for you. We live in a very different time now from even 15 years ago in terms of the route to it. So, what advice would you have?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, just go out and kind of make a film, and there's kind of nothing that stops you because now anyone can make a film, even an iPhone. So you just go ahead and try, and always try to achieve and get better at what you're doing. And I mean, you just got to do it because no matter how much you prepare, you're never going to be prepared for the challenge that is filmmaking. It's something extraordinary, and making a film is really hard. And making a good film, I mean, it shouldn't be possible really when you look at it, but apparently it is because there's a lot of good films being released in the world. But I mean, that's my advice. And also, I mean, now, like I said, you can make it with any resources, but if you still need inspiration, go ahead and read some good books on filmmaking. I think the one I recommend the most is probably Robert Rodriguez, Rebel Without a Crew. Obviously, I think a lot of you already know that story, so I don't need to tell it, but
yeah. And another audience question. You're both welcome to answer any of these, but this one has initially been put to you, Ralph. What was it like launching a home release movie during the pandemic? Was it limiting, or perhaps even seen as advantage? They've also asked about kind of the timing with the remastered games, but just that it's a fairly unique. Well, not unique. I guess every film at the moment is being released in that way, but unprecedented. So how did you find that?
Yeah, it was sort of. I mean, it was obviously it's a bummer that happened. We'd just gone to Mammoth and we'd won two awards in Mammoth. We did our premiere in Mammoth, and then right after that, everything gets shut down. So thankfully, we actually were able to do a showing in a theater. That was one of the things I really thank Mammoth Film Festival for, and we'll always be grateful to Tanner and the whole crew up there for that. But it really put a damper on everything because we had been planning on doing a one night only in a bunch of theaters, and that got canned. So it's it's fine. I think the streaming has done okay. It's done great. I think people are sitting home looking for content, so that helped us out quite a bit. But it's just kind of rough not to be able to go to, actually in person to more film festivals and shop the film around. I mean, this is really the worldwide premiere in most territories. We and with Wood Entertainment, we're currently seeking international distribution partners still. The COVID pandemic has kind of thrown a wrench into some of that stuff all over. As you know, people are shut down in places. So it's been tough, but we're still here. We're still doing it, and we're fine. So it's been tougher on a lot of other people, but it's you can't really complain. We've been doing great, and on Amazon, we've got great reviews. The people are loving the film, so overall we're happy for sure.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll go to pivot back briefly to one of my questions I hadn't asked yet. It was like, how have you found the response? Like, I imagine it's possibly made the hard work worth it. But just interesting. Ludwig, I'll put that one to you. How have you found the response to this film?
No, it's been cool because obviously a lot of the risks that we took, which was essentially making this more oriented towards, having it be appealing to not just gamers, but like anyone. And that's been really rewarding in the sense that, I mean, I have a lot of friends that don't really know about Tony Skater as much as I do, but obviously they know I've been obsessed with it for all my life. So they want to know what is this all about. And they watched the film and, they were like, yeah, okay, I think I get it now. And a lot of people did praise that direction. And I also think that's one of the reasons, the film connected with a lot of people at Mammoth Film Festival, for example, and that stuff. And obviously it was something I was always kind of prepared to have criticized. And I know that, some people have kind of come out and said like, oh, well, there's more information on the Tony Hawk games in a YouTube video than there is in his documentary. And I see the point. Obviously this documentary isn't about like the revert and spine transfer being introduced in Tony Hawk 4. But in that sense, I kind of see this as the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games through the perspective of the skaters and their industry, and not the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games through the perspective of Wikipedia. So I hope you get it. Yeah.
I'll start asking Ralph all that stuff about the spine transfer now. No, don't worry.
I have no. See, that's where that's where like we would have interviews and people would say things and he would be like, no, that actually came in Tony Hawk 4. I'm like, I'm Googling. I'm like, yeah, he's right. It came in Tony Hawk 4. I mean, any song, you name a song or a band, he'll tell you what game they were in.
Oh, man, it's just, do not put that pressure on me like that. You can try,
but the soundtrack thing is amazing, right? That and the name of the documentary, I can't, when I say it in my head, it doesn't come out spoken. It comes out as a lyric, right? I remember some PlayStation 1 games, you could put the CD and skip to track 2 and listen to the soundtrack on the game. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't, well, in the UK, you couldn't do that with Tony Hawk Skateboarding, as it was called. So I remember copying it to cassette tape with all the sound effects and all, right? But I think a lot of people and obviously we're covering stuff in the documentary, but perhaps that's one of the most profound effects of the game, right? Is, it's not just that I bought some of the records by those bands, but then that got me into other stuff. Records I'm still buying today might be connected to that, right? That soundtrack was incredible. Did you feel that at the time, Ralph, on the soundtrack? Now, you've got a lot of the bands saying we didn't really know what putting our music in a game was back then.
Yeah, I mean, I recall that when we actually started putting the music, like in the dev cycle, where we started putting music tracks into the game, it made such a big difference in the feeling of it. It also made a big difference in really wanting to turn them off after a while, because you're constantly hearing the same song for 9 months. It's kind of like so it's but yeah, we kind of felt that it had a big impact. There was a video game across from in the bowling alley across, Top Skater was an arcade game, and it also had sort of a soundtrack that went with it. But Ludwig will probably recall better than I don't think they had actual songs. Did they, Ludwig?
That's actually a thing. So IGN did a real good article on which both Ralph and I are in, so I should read it. But I mean, where I actually said that is that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater wasn't the first game to have a licensed soundtrack. It wasn't even the first skateboarding game to have a licensed soundtrack. Mm-hmm. Actually, I mean, even Street Skater, which was I think a Sega game.
Street Skater,
they had Less Than Jake in '98, so that's pretty rad. But anyway. But I mean, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, that's the game that set the standard for everything that came after it, because I mean, they really gave it like an authentic mix, and it really felt like you're watching one of those skateboarding videos where, in the skate videos too, I mean, the soundtrack was always the most, appealing part to me. That's how I discovered a lot of bands. And I really feel like Tony Hawk Pro Skater captured that. And then as the games evolved too, they started including more hip hop songs, like Chad Muska and his Shorty's crew, obviously they were more hip-hop skaters, and they started including a lot of those songs too as well. So I kind of felt like it was always something they could expand, and they really did. And then by the time we get to, American Wasteland, there's even, original cover songs. But, you have all these modern pop-punk bands covering like Misfits and Gorilla Biscuit and stuff like that. So, it could always evolve, and it did. Even all the way up to now with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1+2. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you can kind of get a feel for the impact. Obviously we had to have that music in our documentary. We had to have those songs, and you can kind of, if you watch a documentary and you don't have those songs, it's a completely different feel. Like that, once you hear that music, it kind of clicks in, and it brings back all those memories of how it was when you're sitting in front of the video game and playing. And that's why I think the music is it's such an integral part of the video game, but the documentary as well, the songs that were picked that kind of go along with it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And even just you, Ludwig, mentioning Gorilla Biscuit, it's like a band that had a huge impact on my life through, I guess, the stuff they sing about and so on. And here we are mentioning bands like that at London Games Festival all these years on, right? It's the first time I've ever mentioned Gorilla Biscuits when talking at a games conference or so. And like, yeah, that thing of it lasting is really interesting, right? Like the impact is still happening now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to try and squeeze in one last audience question because I realise we're almost out of time. This is actually one about the production of the game. So if you can't remember, Ralph, no worries at all. No, but someone was asking, Colin was asking about the time you put into recording the audio for the game, as in the sound effects and so on, right? That's another real part of it. It has a physicality to it in terms of the audio. Do you remember much of the effort that went into that process?
Oh yeah, I was involved in a lot of it at the very beginning. Great. From either running skateboards over coping to make sounds. We had a couple. Initially, we had Keith Aram was a sound guy that we had that we worked with. He would have a boom mic and follow people around on skateboards over different surfaces. We used the skate ramps at Joel's house, the president of Neversoft. We also used the skate ramp when it moved over to my house to kind of get the transition sounds and that. So we tried to keep it as realistic as possible. Also, given the amount of memory each platform had, the first PlayStation obviously had very little. So you try to get different, when you went over concrete, you got a different sound than when you went over tile. But that just kept expanding and expanding. And then, there were internal sound designers. Dave Rowe is one of them that really pushed the limits on all of the sound for all the sound effects and doing sound design for all of the cut scenes and all of that. Those things that became just a process in and of itself with production people overseeing that whole thing as well.
Great. Thanks. Really fascinating, Ralph. And I just wanted to pick that one out because although I guess it was about the game rather than the documentary's relationship with the game, like for all the talk of the soundtrack, they're incredible games in terms of the sound effects and so on. So yeah, glad we got to touch on that. Very briefly before we go, no worries if the answer to this is no, but Ludwig or Ralph, were you able to say anything about what you're up to next in the world of filmmaking, or if there's anything we should be keeping an eye on? If not, all good. But
yeah, I mean, we don't have. I can't really give a ton of information, but Ludwig and I have partnered up on our next project. We're actually working on it. Should be shooting soon. It's going to be completely different. It's not anything to do with skateboarding. It's original concept that Ludwig wrote. I sent it to me. I was blown away by how awesome it is, and I think people will be when they finally get to see our next project. I think they're going to be blown away. So this is just step one. Step two is we're going to turn it up a notch, at least in my mind. What do you got to say, Ludwig?
Well, all I got to say, just to clarify, is that it's not a documentary. So
not a documentary.
Right. Okay, but people who enjoyed Pretending I'm a Superman should keep an eye on your names in terms of future things happening. It sounds like.
I do think so, and they already can. There's already a few of my other stuff online.
Of course, yeah.
You can check out The Outsider, which was my latest short film. On
definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, it's too dark for me to go for a skate after saying I was inspired to skate. So maybe I'll maybe I'll put that on. Yeah. Well, yeah. So much, both. Taking your time, both in different time zones from the UK, both on different sides of the world from each other. So really appreciate your time and effort, and of course, really appreciate the film. Again, we're not in front of our audience, but at this point, I imagine we'll pause. And there's a riotous applause as they all stand to their feet. But yeah, the audience, really appreciate you sticking around for the Q&A. The enthusiasm in the comments read through the film and beyond was really great. And thank you, of course, for all the questions. Sorry to those people whose questions I didn't get asked. And with that, we'll say goodbye and thank you, everyone. Cheers. And I hope to see you again, Luke and Ralph. Thanks.
Right, bye. Cheers. Thanks.